Donald Trump says negotiations will start immediately to end the war in Ukraine. The US president says Russia and Ukraine both want peace. But will Kyiv have any say in a final deal? And who will be responsible for maintaining the peace? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. We're on the way to getting peace. That's what US President Donald Trump said after speaking to the leaders of Russia and Ukraine. After a lengthy phone conversation with Vladimir Putin and a shorter one with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Trump seems confident a deal can be struck. But who will come out on top? Trump and Putin have plans to meet first in Saudi Arabia and follow with mutual state visits. Is that a sign that Zelenskyy might be sidelined from the negotiations? And what about Europe? With Ukrainian NATO membership seemingly off the table, how can the region's future security be guaranteed? We'll get to those questions in a moment, but first this report by Michael Apple.
I will get the problem solved and...
He didn't end it as quickly as he promised on the campaign trail.
And it will take me no longer than one day.
But US President Donald Trump is swiftly moving the needle on the war in Ukraine. It started with a 90-minute phone call to Vladimir Putin,
President Zelenskyy,
followed by a conversation with Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
And I think we're on the way to getting peace. I think President Putin wants peace and President Zelenskyy wants peace, and I want peace. I just want to see people stop getting killed.
Earlier that day, Trump's new defense secretary was in Brussels, delivering a blunt message in their assessment of what enduring peace may ultimately cost Ukraine.
Returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering.
More than a decade ago, Russia annexed Crimea and sent troops into Ukraine's eastern Donbas region, where they supported separatist movements in Donetsk and Luhansk. Since Russia's full-scale invasion on 24 February 2022, it's estimated that Ukraine has lost nearly 20% of its territory, with Russia gaining over 4,000 square kilometers last year alone.
We want to end that war. That war is a disaster. It's a really bloody, horrible war.
Since his first term in office, Trump and Putin have shared a somewhat cozy relationship.
Nice to be with you.
Trump's relationship with Zelenskyy, on the other hand, has been fractured at times. Trump labeling him the greatest salesman on earth for his ability to extract hundreds of billions of dollars in US military aid to Ukraine. With Trump and Putin seemingly in the driver's seat of these new negotiations, Zelenskyy tried to spin the developments as a sign of American-Ukrainian unity.
We believe that America's power is enough to, together with us, together with all partners, pressure Russia and Putin towards peace.
In the dance of international diplomacy, Zelenskyy increasingly finds himself without a partner, isolated, and with Ukraine's aspirations of NATO membership now in tatters. He's facing the reality of having to make concessions far greater than his country and the hundreds of thousands who've made the ultimate sacrifice for it would ever want. Michael Apple, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
OK, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Moscow is Vladimir Sotnikov, an independent political scientist and an associate professor of international relations at the Higher School of Economics. In Brussels is Theresa Fallon, the founder and director of the Centre for Russia-Europe-Asia Studies. And in Kyiv is Volodymyr Yermolenko. He's chief editor at Ukraine World, a media platform designed to explain Ukraine's politics and society to an international audience. Welcome to you all. Theresa, I'll start with you, if I may. European capitals have been blindsided by this, haven't they? Trump says their delegations would start negotiations immediately. So is he cutting Ukraine and the Europeans out of the negotiations?
Well, Trump has been announcing that he would do this in 24 hours. Now it's 100 days. So the Europeans should have been thinking about this. But before I go any further, I just want to be clear that these are my personal views and they don't represent any organization that I've ever worked for. So I think that I'm based here in Brussels. I'm at a conference today by chance that, everyone has been talking about this big buzz about what Trump has said and Hegseth's remarks. I called it the 4 no's that were announced yesterday at NATO headquarters. So they're upset. European leaders and officials are extremely upset. But if we look at the stock market, it's been responding very positively in Europe. Let's face it, Europeans have a lot of fatigue in regard to the war. We've seen right-wing parties grow in Europe in response to all the spending needed to continue the war in Ukraine. There doesn't seem to be an end in sight. We've also seen European leaders like Orban try to create the climate for peace talks. China kind of undermined Zelensky's efforts to have peace talks in Switzerland. So I think that Trump has given the Europeans a huge wake-up call, even though they should have been expecting something, because he said this very often, that he would solve this problem. It's not clear yet what is going to happen. As you noted, there will be meetings in Saudi Arabia. Zelensky, we shouldn't count him out yet. He's very agile, and it's important that Ukrainian interests are also involved in all of this. But the main sticking point in all of this will be, how is this going to be maintained? Because the biggest fear for Europeans, and especially the Central Eastern European countries on the front lines, is they don't want to Minsk, 3.0. They don't want to see Russia use this opportunity to rest, rearm, and then reinvade, because they feel that they're the next ones on Putin's menu.
Vladimir, in Kyiv, you've heard Theresa give a long list of reasons why everybody would welcome the ending to this conflict. Zelensky's in a difficult position here, isn't he? He said he's had a long conversation about the possibilities of achieving peace with Trump, but do you think he's going to be cut out of any talks?
It's impossible to cut out Ukraine of any talks. I mean, we always forget about Ukrainian agency, and we always forget when we're talking about this, how Ukraine was actually changing history in the past decades through the Orange Revolution in 2000s, through the Maidan Revolution of Dignity in 2013 and 14, and through its resistance to the Russian invasion in 2022. Everybody was thinking Ukraine is unable to do anything and to resist, and it appears that it is Ukrainian ordinary people, Ukrainian soldiers who are actually changing the geopolitics. So we actually don't know anything about this Trump peace plan. We don't know how it will be implemented. We don't know how Americans will respond to basically Russian ultimatums, because what the Russians put forward very maximalistic demands, and people commenting yesterday's news just don't take into consideration this Ukrainian agency.
Vladimir, in Moscow, do you reckon the Kremlin is very pleased with the phone call that Putin had with Trump?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to Inside Story program, and my regards to other colleagues on the show. I think that Vladimir Putin was very much pleased by the call which he made and President Trump made to him, and this 90-minute long conversation. I think that actually the two leaders made the first attempt after 3 years to reinstate the relations which were broken from the 2022 when the special military operation started. So I think that this is probably a start of the other relations. When I'm saying other relations, I mean that the close relations between the United States and Russian Federation. And I think that most probably the two leaders will suggest a viable plan for peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian conflict in the future.
Theresa, Germany criticised the US today for making public concessions to Putin before the negotiations have even begun. That is, NATO membership not being a realistic outcome, no troops in Ukraine, and saying the pre-2014 Ukraine borders, that's before the annexation of Crimea, are unrealistic objectives. What other leverage is left in these negotiations?
I think, as you noted, most people were shocked because, Trump had the ghostwritten book, The Art of the Deal. So it seemed like they laid out 4 things on the table that could have been used as some sort of leverage with the Russians. Other analysts have said that this was a way to bring Russia to the table. But let's not forget, this was a war of choice by Putin in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians have paid a horrific cost for this war in terms of the death of civilians, soldiers, and destroying of the country. So does the U.S. want to be seen as rewarding Putin's moves? Nevertheless, most wars are ended through some sort of peace negotiation. So I think that the leverage issue is key. I mean, the U.S. can have economic and military leverage. That's something that they can bring to the table. But I think one thing that's kind of the elephant in the room in all of this is that the U.S. is showing that they've prioritized China and that this war in Ukraine is dividing attention, eating up valuable resources, and they want Europe to step up to the plate and do something. I mean, there's no reason why Europe can't do more. And they've been really dragging their heels. So it's a bit rich that the German government is saying this, since Chancellor Scholz wouldn't do anything unless he was holding Biden's hand, for example, in regard to sending tanks to Ukraine. So the Europeans have been moving extremely slowly, very carefully and worryingly. So the fact that Europe was so slow in their response to the initial invasion in Ukraine really was detrimental to their own security. Now that the U.S. has limited resources and Trump has a very different approach than the more transatlanticist Biden administration, but we actually see Europeans are starting to pay more on. They had promised 2%. Not even all EU member NATO members have reached this agreed upon expenditure. Now, Trump has asked for 5% spending for NATO, and now Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO, has said that 3% is the new goal. So Europeans need to spend more. They've had a holiday from history. They haven't really been spending on defense for about 30 years, and it's going to take a long time to catch up. So I think it's clear the U.S. has this big concern about China. And I think sometimes the messaging of European leaders, for example, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, when she was at Davos, signaled in her speech that Europe was willing to work more closely with China to increase economic dependence on China. So I think that was maybe a red flag to the Trump administration. So this idea of kind of sitting on the fence, trying to benefit from both the U.S. and China did not really help their position in all of this. Yes, they're going to have huge security concerns, but unless Europe takes care of this, the U.S. has made it very clear that they're concerned about China and that Europe is going to have to take care of this.
OK, so in Kyiv, Vladimir, is there an appreciation there, a fear that, yes, the US has got other priorities now? Theresa mentioned China. I mean, doesn't Zelenskyy have anything he has to negotiate with? Wasn't that the point of taking Kursk, that bit of Russian territory there?
I think the first, it's not the Ukrainian problem, as your Russian guest has commented. It's basically a Russian problem and the problem of the Russian imperialism, which is, very, very aggressive and goes into other territories and other countries. So there is a big naivete, as I see both in Europe and America, that there will be some kind of ceasefire, and Ukraine will not get security guarantees, and we will see what will happen. I will tell you what will happen. The Russians will rearm, and the Russians will wait, and they will relaunch the invasion into Ukraine or maybe in the Baltic states. And this will be, of course, the problem for the whole European Union and for the whole NATO, unless we and Ukrainian partners help to achieve long-term peace and sustainable peace. This is the key objective here, the sustainable peace. And the sustainable peace means that there is protection of Ukrainian sovereignty and independence. And look, if the capture of Ukrainian territories is legalized, then it means that you can violate international law, you can violate borders. So expect more wars in the whole planet. Expect wars in other continents as well. And I would be very, very worried on the part of other countries and other continents because it basically opens the way of the Pandora box.
OK, Vladimir, in Moscow, that is an issue, isn't it? Can Russia be trusted in any peace deal? Can Russia be trusted to keep the peace, to maintain the peace?
I would put it another way. Can Ukraine be trusted when saying that Russia in the future will attack Ukraine, just like Ukrainian guest says. So I think that first of all, Russia will be insisting. Sorry to interrupt you. That the realities on the ground should be recognized by all participants of the peaceful negotiations, by the United States, by the European Union, by Ukraine. So that is the first thing. Without recognition of that, there will be no sense in doing any peaceful negotiations.
So just quickly, Vladimir, just tell me, what are those realities on the ground that should be recognized from Moscow's perspective? Just one of those.
Okay. The realities on the ground, that means the recognition that Zaporozhye region, Khersonsky region, Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic are the territories of Russian Federation, just like it was stated and reinstated in the Russian Constitution almost 2 years ago. The other precondition, I think, is that the Ukrainian troops should be retreating from the Kursk region. That was an adventure which was undertaken by Ukrainian troops last August. So that means that they just seized a part of Russian territory, so they should be retreated from that. This is the precondition. Without taking it into consideration, I think any viable peace deal could be reached.
Okay, so let me just quickly go then back to Vladimir in Kyiv. Yes, you can. But essentially, Pete Hegseth said the same thing. The reality is what Vladimir in Moscow has said there is what Zelenskyy is going to have to accept in the end.
No, look, I don't see a point of your TV channel to invite people who just repeat Putin's propaganda. But let's just think carefully about this. In Russian constitution, there is much more territories than Russia actually controls. And your guest knows that. For example, in Russian constitution, you have basically the center of the Zaporizhia region and Kherson region, the big cities Zaporizhia and Kherson. And what Russia will demand for Ukrainians to retreat from them, of course, Ukrainians will not retreat. And of course, Ukrainians will fight. But taking a big city, Russians were unable to take any big city during this war. And I will remind you that they have actually taken Kherson, but then they retreated from Kherson under the pressure of the Ukrainian troops. So basically, if they continue the war for these big cities, the war will continue. And that's one of those tiny details that I'm afraid neither Trump nor many other people around him aware of. So the Russian appetites are very, very big, and they are showing that they are unable to compromise this. Even when your Russian guest says the reality on the ground, it seems that he doesn't really know what he's talking about. So, and these are the tiny points which are very important to keep in mind.
Understood. Theresa, can I ask you, is this going to be a big test of unity for Europe and for NATO? Europe not necessarily united on how the war in Ukraine, on the future of Ukraine. Is it going to be a big test as these negotiations take place?
I think that there's been a lot of magical thinking in regard to Ukraine. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of leaders say things that people want to hear, and behind closed doors, people say different things. So the EU has promised that Ukraine will become a member, so that would be a very important development, I think. And because the mantra of the Europeans is we have to pay and we're never a player. But I think that they have stated many times they want Ukraine to become a member of the EU. That would be an important starting point. But the big issue is Europe's underspending, and there was never a strategy for the end of the war. It was almost like, let's just give Ukraine enough things to survive, but not to win. And this has been something that the Europeans have been criticized for. There's never been really a plan to win. There was just a plan to just kind of carry on. And people are forgetting things, and they're getting resentful of lack of Russian energy. So it's a dismal experience from all points of view. There are too many negative lessons, as the Ukrainian journalist has pointed out, that countries will be might perceive this as a way to, just grab territory, because Theresa, where's international law here?
Sorry, time is against us, but can I ask, do you think Russia would even tolerate Ukraine's membership of the European Union?
Well, that was kind of the original problem, wasn't it? It wasn't about NATO at all. That was the attractive story that they used. It was that Ukraine was moving westward, turning towards the West, becoming, signing an agreement with the EU. People tend to forget that because the other narrative is much more convenient. But it was really having a Ukraine anchored in the West with free trade and values and liberal democracy. And that is something that Moscow could not accept. They didn't mind as long as they had their leader running Ukraine, but when they were kind of pulling closer to the West and with the EU institutions, that was the red line for Putin.
Vladimir, in Moscow, there's been enormous human cost for Russia from this conflict. It's not gone at all according to the Kremlin's plan, which had envisioned it lasting just a few days. So it's in Moscow's interest that this ends quickly as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is actually. But first of all, I would like to say, and just to give an answer to the Ukrainian guest who actually blamed me that I don't know what I'm talking about. I really know very well what I'm talking about when I was saying about the realities on the ground. So I think that actually it seems that this is a great cost for both countries, for Ukraine and for Russia. And I think that it is within the interests, the national interest of both countries to stop these hostilities. But if the talk will be going like that, like in our program from the side of Ukraine, so I think that any viable, again, I'm just repeating myself, any viable peace agreement could be reached because the two sides, under the mediation of the United States or under the mediation of European Union, without actually recognizing that Ukraine should be a part of NATO, they should come to agreement. If they don't come to agreement, so that will be not possible to reach a peace deal.
OK. Vladimir, in Kyiv, just help us understand what is the feeling of Ukrainians at the moment. You have people exhausted and relieved that the war might soon be over, or angry that after the deaths of hundreds of thousands of young men, they're going to lose nearly 20% of their country. Zelensky's not all that popular either at the moment, according to the latest polls.
Well, of course, Ukrainians are tired, Ukrainians are exhausted, but it's only one part of the truth. Another part of the truth is that, again, the army is there. Russians has not made any big progress last year. Just look at the map. Look at the map, and you will see that the majority of those territories which are now occupied by the Russians have been taken just in the few weeks after the full-scale invasion started, when Ukraine was really not very much prepared. So since then, Ukraine miraculously mobilized a big army and many of the people there are civilians, to protect this huge territory and huge border. And Ukrainians are now attacking Russia very deep into its territory. And it is Russia which should be worried, because it has a huge territory, but this territory is really unprotected. So again, I mean, don't think that Ukrainians will retreat. Don't think that Ukrainians will give up just because some statements of some big political leaders.
Theresa, is Europe going to have to pay for all of this in the end? Reconstruction funds, arms supplies, peacekeepers. The Americans don't seem to want to be involved at all. So what leverage would Europe have if it's the one that's got to foot the bill at the end of all of this?
Well, that's the big question. That's what the Europeans are horrified about. They want everyone to come in and pay. They want multiple countries to work their UN peacekeepers perhaps showing up in Ukraine. So all these facts and details need to be worked out. It's early days. We don't know. We don't have anything yet from the Trump administration on this. So that is something, player, not player. This is something what Europeans are worried about. But this has always been described as an existential crisis for Europe. And I sincerely don't think they took it as seriously as an existential crisis. They should have been far more proactive. And they hopefully, I don't know what it will take. There's been war going on in Ukraine for 3 years now, almost. We're almost up to the 24th anniversary of February 24th. So Europe has got to get their act together. I mean, still member states have not paid 2% of their towards NATO. So I think the they always like to say we woke up, but then we pressed the snooze button. And it's really hard to get them out of this. They always say they act better in a crisis. They'll pull together. Europe is deeply fragmented right now. There are a lot of issues and problems. Who's even been talking about a peace plan in Europe? We haven't heard that. We haven't heard anybody apart from Viktor Orban, the leader of Hungary. And finally, I just would like to add to Volodymyr's comments about how bad things are for Russia. I mean, Ukraine has been able to fend off the Russians for 3 years now. The Russians are using North Korean soldiers in Kursk. I mean, this shows how difficult the war has been for Russia, that they actually have to use North Korean soldiers.
Thank you. All right. Vladimir, quickly with you. In Moscow, NATO's got these battle groups in the eastern reaches of Europe, in the Baltic states. Moscow's not happy about them, but can it understand those eastern countries and those Baltic countries' nervousness about what Moscow might demand of NATO and the West in these talks?
Okay, Bernard. I can assure you that Moscow has no aggressive plans towards Baltic neighbors. And Moscow, really, you are right. Moscow is nervous, very much nervous, about the presence of the NATO troops in the Baltic states and in Eastern Europe. Because if you remember the history, 30 years ago, NATO promised and the United States promised that they will be not putting boots on the ground from NATO soldiers closer to the borders of Russia. Now we have different story. So that's why I would like to say that Moscow won't tolerate any NATO troops which will be closer to the borders of Russian Federation.
OK, folks, I'm very sorry. We're completely out of time. But thanks to all our guests, to Vladimir Sotnikov, to Theresa Fallon and to Volodymyr Yermolenko. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the whole team here, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.